And welcome to everyone joining us here in December for a webinar on healthcare intranets and talking a bit about intranets in general, how healthcare organizations are using them, and then really deep diving around a case study at Mayo Newhall Hospital. We're very excited to have Patrick joining us to tell their story here as well. Before we get into that story, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about some background, some terms, and a little bit of research that we've done here over the past year about how we see healthcare organizations struggling with the intranet question. And the first thing as we start to look at intranets and talk about intranets is just a terminology question. Certainly, I think most of us are familiar with, internet or, public website, terms like that. But as more public sites get logins, and just sort of some of the things get a little blurry between the definitions of these things, we thought we would sort of reset ourselves on the taxonomy here a little bit. So when we're talking about internet or public website, we're really looking, and really with all these, we're looking at the audiences that we're trying to speak to for these websites. What are the audiences for which we've built these particular platforms? And so for the internet, that's the public, that's consumers. To some extent, it's prospective patients and current patients. Certainly, job seekers fall into that. Folks who are external to the organization, but people that we do business with, right? Folks of that nature. At the other end of the spectrum, and what we'll be talking about most today, are intranets. And that is really a private website for employees of the organization. It's really people entirely within the fold of the organization. And then sometimes we have these sort of middle grounds. They tend to be called extranets, and it's for organizations or for individuals who are close to the organization but aren't in that employee bucket. So within healthcare, we tend to see extranets often set up for doctors who may or may not be employed by the organization, boards of directors, groups like that. Sometimes for vendors of the organization as well, we'll have extranets there. So individuals and organizations that are very close but aren't within the fold of being employed directly by the organization. Today we're going to be talking again about intranets, but just understand that there are some other distinctions out there, and just because a site maybe has a login, for instance, or is restricted to just a certain group of people, that doesn't necessarily make it an intranet in the way that we're talking about it today. Today we're talking about communicating with and engaging employees through digital platforms. We did some research earlier this year with healthcare organizations trying to understand how they're approaching this challenge of the intranet platforms. And so if you'll indulge me for a minute, we took a little different approach to the way we approached our research, and I wanted to talk just a little bit about that before we get into the findings here. One of the things that we've been doing a lot of, and this is sort of an idea that we get out of, say, SHSMD Bridging Worlds. If you're familiar with that research paper, if you've got a SHSMD member in your organization, I suggest you get a copy and read it if you haven't already. And one of the big takeaways from that was that organizations in our space, healthcare in general, really need to be nimble. They need to be agile. They need to be able to adapt. We need to be able to act much more like startups do in order to deal with the uncertainty and the changes that have been coming over the past few years and are expected to continue to flow at us over the next 5 to 10 years, certainly. And so we've been working a lot with startup organizations, the startup community here, and trying to learn how those kinds of organizations use very limited resources to get very deep insights from consumers. And we've been taking those techniques and bringing them into our organization and trying to use them and experiment with them as we try to do our own product development and develop our own understandings of the market. So for understanding intranets a little bit better, and we've been doing intranets for a long time, but we wanted to take a sort of a new look at this. We modeled a research project around a startup weekend event. And if you haven't heard of these or haven't participated in these before, they tend to take place. It's like a Friday evening, all day Saturday, part of a Sunday. And during that time, groups will get together, they'll ideate, they'll come up with an idea they want to pursue, they'll go out and they'll do customer discovery work where they talk with actual customers, in some cases other people who they would have to work with in this business, other people who they might be buying things from, or suppliers, or partners, or other people who might be part of the ecosystem they would need for that business, but certainly consumers, people who would be using and buying the products, and develop a great understanding of what the needs are, the problems, how they look at those problems, start to test out different solution ideas, things like that. So in the course of a very limited amount of time, get a huge amount of insight into a particular problem space. And so we went through and did that for intranets, and talked with some geometric clients, who use our platform for intranets, some who we work with in other capacities but have some other intranet, some people who we don't work with at all, one organization who really had no intranet at all but really thought they should and wanted to, just to understand how they approached this and sort of the problems they were solving, and how things were working for them as they tried to tackle those issues with the solutions they had in hand. Amongst the insights that we got from that, we really saw a big split right down the line around what area of the organization owned this particular problem, owned this platform. And broadly, it generally fell into either an IT-led effort or a marketing communications, corporate communications led effort. And not surprisingly, given those two groups and how differently they approach the world, the problems they were trying to solve, and the way that they went about approaching the development of an intranet and what they were trying to put out there were very, very different as well. From the IT side, in terms of what they wanted to accomplish, they were very focused on removing some of the things they saw as problems or distractions within the IT environment. Some of that was emails, reducing the number of emails sent to everyone in the organization or everyone even within a facility, those sorts of things. They saw those as big distractions to the organization, and just a real problem in a lot of different ways. And they were also really focused on fixing the network share drive problem, right? You've got, and I think most of us have worked in an organization somewhere along the way where there's like a Z drive out there and you just dump whatever out there, and that's where people find things. And it's always kind of a mess. And from the IT perspective, every day they're being asked to go out and recover documents that have magically disappeared off there, things of that nature. So all kinds of challenges both within IT and, frankly, the usability of those things to support what people need in the organization. So ultimately, out of that thinking, they approached this to say, we need to get a tool out there, put it in the hands of individuals, put it in the hands of departments, open it up, offer training and other resources to teach people how to use this thing, and just let them go with it, right? They wanted to provide a platform that was an alternative to just the file manager and those sorts of things, and then departments could use that in whatever way they felt most appropriate. Marketing communications approaches from a very different perspective. They were really looking to improve employee communications. They were really looking to improve employee engagement. And ultimately, they wanted a curated set of resources so that people could easily find the things that were most relevant to them very quickly and easily. They were less inspired by, let me give tools to people all throughout the organization to do whatever they need. It was really, hey, we have some communication goals at a corporate or an enterprise level. We know there are some engagement and communication needs at departmental levels and in some other places in the organization, and we want to selectively hand out the ability to do that and really curate content, curate resources, and make sure that we're messaging and communicating effectively to our entire employee base. So obviously some very different ways of approaching that, and on the few occasions where both of these groups were really in the room, it was almost certainly led by one or the other, and you could really see the shape of the project coming out of that. We see intranets then developing in a lot of levels, and today we wanted to share really sort of a core blocking and tackling kind of intranet, something that's really going out there and doing these fundamental functions, because we saw so many organizations within that research where they didn't have anything that was doing sort of that marketing value side of this like that set of goals as we were out there talking to organizations. Many organizations have something out there that's called an intranet, but in terms of a platform that's really being used strategically to communicate with employees and engage them, many organizations didn't have anything that was really accomplishing that today. And I think this was a big step by one organization, Mayo, Newhall, to get to that initial stage of having a platform that was doing this thing that they needed it to do. Intranets are a little different than public websites. I think most of us have probably worked through a public website project at some point. One of the things that we talk about a lot when we're in those projects is really distancing the way you're presenting your story to the consumer from the internal structure of the organization. When we're talking to consumers and patients and prospective patients and job seekers, very often we need to craft this story in the way that they think about the way they need to access care, and that often is very different than the internal structure of the organization. Intranets have the same concept of writing to your audience and organizing content to your audience, but since the audiences are internal audiences, we end up mirroring in many different ways the way that content's presented to the actual organization structure. So you end up having the ability to do some messaging and communication and organizing of resources at a centralized level across the enterprise, very often at physical facility levels, by departments, so infectious disease or ER or whatever it may be, and then sometimes by functions as well. So nursing may have its own sections of things and be able to communicate directly to that audience that spans across physical facilities and departments and those sorts of things. So the way that we approach these things and organize it on the internet, very different than the way that we tend to do so in a public-facing web realm. We also were able to identify a couple of significant trends in terms of where organizations are focusing energy with their intranets. And certainly at the top of that list is moving into a mobile-friendly environment and making this one more tool that really works on phones and tablets. Many of our organizations, maybe most of our organizations, have moved into a realm where we're allowing these devices on some sort of network where you can get at internal resources. In most cases, it's a bring-your-own-device approach, but still, people are able to use their phones, use their tablets to get at those resources at some level. And so responsive design becomes incredibly important, and this is lagging a few years behind the wave of this kind of redesign work that happened on the public website, but we're now seeing it being an important factor for intranets as well. We are seeing a number of intranets that are authenticating users. So this has always been kind of a closed environment, but oftentimes it's been closed from the perspective of if you're not on the internal network for the hospital or for the health system, you couldn't get to it. But so long as you were on a computer or a device that was logged into the right network, you could get to this resource in kind of an open way. By authenticating, that really opens up a couple of possibilities. One, and one that for some legal reasons, Mayo Newhall is not taking advantage of, but some organizations are allowing access to some of these resources from home. And so the process where people are logging in with their credentials, that's a way to facilitate that while still keeping the content secure. The other thing that we're starting to see is more and more use of personalization, again, to get the right information to the right person at the right time. We do see intranets continuing to be an important tool, or important portal for jumping off to other internal tools, other systems within the organization, and this just being the way for people to find those things. And we're also seeing a lot of different work going on to try and engage employees. And these aren't always necessarily business critical functions, but things like cafeteria menus are a great way to just get people in the practice of getting into the intranet. It's something that people like, people use on a regular basis, things like that. We've seen a couple of organizations that have done things like swap boards, where kind of buy, sell, trade, classified kinds of things. In part that pulls out some of those all-hands emails, so you don't have to send an email out every time your dog has puppies and you're trying to get rid of them. But in addition to that, it's just a great tool for a lot of different things where employees get in and they engage with it, and then once they get into the habit of going into the intranet, then it's a little easier to then get them to do other things that they need to do within that platform. Finally, we tried to identify what was driving organizations to either do their first strategic intranet project or do a redesign of whatever it is that they're doing out there from an intranet perspective today. And no surprise, that move to mobile and mobile devices, the need to have responsive design, was at the top of that list for intranets, just as it was for websites over the last couple of years, although we've now seen pretty much all public websites in the healthcare space move into a responsive design world at this point. The other things that we saw moving the needle for intranets, though, is really more about this trend of mergers and acquisitions. Our organizations are getting larger and more complicated, and all of those factors are creating the need to communicate more effectively with all employees within the organization. It used to be that for a lot of organizations that physically all of the different pieces were co-located on the same campus or sometimes in the same building, and senior executives, just by walking the halls twice a day, could largely bump into most of the people that they needed to communicate with on a regular basis. That was a pretty effective communication strategy. Today, with retail strategies, bigger footprints, and just frankly a movement where doctors, for instance, aren't doing hybrid practices both in an office and in the hospital. So they never come to those centralized locations anymore. It's much, much harder to communicate across the organization effectively. And when you're bringing multiple organizations together in particular, and you're trying to get a consistent culture and get people to work together, the needs for communication have just gone up and up and up. And so having an effective tool at the center of that has really become important to the success of some of those culture-based initiatives within these organizations. So with that foundation, that sort of view of what we're seeing across the industry, I'd like to introduce Patrick Moody to talk a little bit about what's been going on at Henry Mayo Newhall.
Greetings from Southern California, everybody. If you have any rain where you are, please send it our way. I'm Patrick Moody from Henry Mayo Newhall Hospital. Ben, do you want to go to the next slide, please? So this is a view of the main entrance of our hospital. It's slightly dated. Just for the record, we don't always have a police car parked in front of the hospital. If you saw a current view of the hospital, go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Ben. You would see a large structure that's in the background because we're in the process of building a new patient tower. We currently we're at 238 bed, independent, not-for-profit hospital. We're located about 30 miles north of downtown Los Angeles, or the way we talk about it here is about 45 minutes north of downtown Los Angeles, depending on the traffic. You always say depending on the traffic. You can see the stats here for our hospital, how many employees, physicians, volunteers. One thing about us is that most of our admissions come through our emergency department, about 70% of our admissions, and as I mentioned, we are growing. The tower is going to increase our capacity by up to 142 beds, and it's scheduled to be open for patient care in 2019. Next slide, please. So what drove our change to launch a new intranet? So our previous intranet, which is called HenryNet, was owned by IT. I think it was probably very good when it was first built and served its purposes, but over time, both audience demands and audience needs have changed. It was a difficult site to navigate. It had a number of links. In fact, it was basically a series of links is what it was. The platform was somewhat difficult to update. There were also security issues with the platform. And it was not, it did not have responsive design, so it wasn't optimized for phones or tablets, which of course is a need in today's world. Next slide, please. So when we decided to undertake the project, we first outlined a number of different goals. One is we wanted to make our intranet be more of a communications hub. Our vision is that every employee and member of our medical staff would log on to HenryNet first thing in the morning or first thing when they get here to sort of find out what's going on, the news of the day and what's going on, what's coming up during the week. We also wanted users just to have a better experience when they visit the site. It was very important for us to have an easy-to-use content management system. I'll talk about that a little bit more later about why that was particularly important. We need to have a system that was functional, that was reliable, that was easy to use by the marketing team. We aren't technical people here, so it had to be fairly easy for us to use. As I mentioned, we wanted to become a communications hub. One of the main means of communication here, or previously, we're working on this, was what we call the master list emails. These are emails that go out to everyone on the distribution list. And as you can probably guess, a lot of the content in those emails aren't relevant to everyone, so we wanted to cut down on that. We also hope to reduce the use of what we call our shared drive. It's essentially a giant folder that people would use to post content that other departments would use. It's very cluttered. It's not very well organized. It would be difficult to find content. So we wanted to reduce the use of that. So those are the goals as we set out. So as we started, we worked with a committee from IT to develop some specifications, specifically technical specifications that those of us in marketing aren't experts in. And with that, we developed an RFI that we sent to 7 vendors. We had gone through a process here fairly recently of launching a new public website. So we had some experience with vendors, most of whom do both public websites and intranets. We had a lot of discussion internally about whether we're going to continue to host HenryNet. We had hosted it internally before, what kind of platform we wanted to use, and so on. We developed a score sheet to evaluate the proposals that we received, and then we had a series of meetings to go over those score sheets. I should mention that in the initial round, there was a SharePoint solution that actually looked very attractive to us. And this is a bit of a cautionary tale. Vendors are reluctant to discuss pricing when they initially submit proposals, and there are a lot of good reasons for that. You sort of have to decide at what point you need to have at least a ballpark conversation. I mention that because the SharePoint solution seemed really terrific to us, but it turned out it would have required a lot of resources and expense that was just out of the question for us. So when all was said and done, we selected Geonetric as our partner. As we went to develop our new site, one of the handicaps that we had is we didn't have any analytics from our previous HenryNet. So we had to figure out a way to determine what people were using HenryNet for and what content they wanted. So we developed a very simple survey that we sent out to all employees and members of the medical staff, and we just asked questions like, why do you visit HenryNet? What kind of content you need? What do you like about the current site? We had a pretty good response rate, so we think that gave us a pretty good representative sample of what people use the intranet for, what they were looking for, and then we used those sample responses to guide us as we started to build out the site map with Geonetric and the design. So in the design process, we did know from what content owners kept up their content on the previous HenryNet. We knew which ones were engaged and involved, and we wanted to bring those in early on in the redesign process for the new HenryNet. So we developed an advisory committee of which we invited those stakeholders and also some stakeholders who we thought should be sort of more engaged in developing and keeping up content on the new HenryNet. We looked at what content they had on our old site, what they want to migrate, and then we also just came up with some cosmetic design changes for the new site. We developed the site on VitalSite. That was the platform. Again, it met all of our specifications, relatively easy to learn, easy for others to use. I think it's important to note that we had a really ambitious launch schedule. Our fiscal year ends September 30th, and we had made a commitment to launch the new site before then. So we had a tight timeline, and I would say that Geonetric did a really good job of keeping us on that timeline. So this is a snapshot of our, this is not the new one, this is the previous one, and previous HenryNet. You can see most of the content, a couple of things to point out is static, the series of links in the two right-hand columns. Really the only portions of this homepage that could be updated were that banner on the lower left. I think there may have been one or two banners below that. Everything else was static. And also you may notice that there's no search box here. So if you didn't know where you were going or what you were looking for, you were kind of out of luck. You can go to the next slide. So this is the new HenryNet. The main thing that shows in the lower right is that there's a responsive design. That's a tablet on the lower right. You can see it's much more graphic. We hope it's much easier to navigate. And I'm just going to go through a few what I think are key points of the new site. So calendar and events, one of the stakeholders that was particularly interested in the site was our education department. You see there's an employee education link on this page. There's a number of ways that you can get to classes and events. But they were particularly interested in having a calendar where users could scroll over dates and see what kind of classes were offered on those dates. And so we now have calendar functionality for them like this, which makes them very happy. This is just a description of a class. You can see, you can find the description, you can click on schedule and location, you could even find related events, and we have a system called HealthStream that manages our classes and registration. You can click to register, or you can call that phone number. We also wanted to have a robust news module so we could update HenryNet easily with the latest news. And again, this is part of our strategy to engage users with current content. So you can view news in a number of different ways and click on a story. This is a story about the director of our emergency department who is featured in Working Nurse magazine. Nice photograph of that handsome gentleman. And so it's pretty easy for us to update the site constantly with news and information, or if there's breaking news. Another example of this is we did have a code triage a couple of weeks ago related to the fires here, and we were able to post code triage on the homepage and provide updates almost in real time to our staff. Another important component of the new site was to make it easy for users to find departments and what they needed. There's an easy way to do that. They're listed, there's an alphabetical bar at the top here, so you just click on the letter. It shows departments that begin with that letter. The number next to them is the extension for that department. So if you're just looking for a phone number, it's right there. If you want more information, you can click on one of the particular links. Go to the next slide. And I think we want to go to the next slide. Oh yeah, so this is a department page here. Again, the contact us information is easily visible on the right side. You see the quick links below. This is what I referred to about reducing use of the shared drive. There's a form there that you can download. Previously, you would have gone to the shared drive to get that form. And then this is the nursing page. Nursing, you'll see on the top navigation next to the search box, there's a nursing link. They're one of our key stakeholders in this, along with physicians. So this top navigation, nursing, physicians, and then the blue bar, department, news, human resources, and so on, those show up on every page. So you can get those departments from any page. And again, this is the nursing homepage. You see a number of links on the left-hand side for content that's important to nursing. And then we also launched a section called Ask the CEO. This is driven apart by twice a year we have these events called employee forums, in which Roger Sieber, our CEO, meets with employees. They're allowed to ask questions. He gives them updates on what's going on at the hospital. He really likes the Q&A part of those forums, so we decided to sort of make an ongoing employee forum with an Ask the CEO section. We haven't fully deployed this yet. We have some tactics that we're going to deploy to increase engagement. So we don't know yet how successful this is going to be until we really start to promote it more robustly. And then this seems fairly basic, but our users were very excited to have a search box. There's the code triage I was talking about on this screenshot. Now where they can't easily find on the home page or whatever the content they're looking for, they can actually search for it now. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more when I talk about metrics. So we do now have Google Analytics on our site. The first month's results we were gratified to see. We actually thought the number of sessions was quite a bit higher than what we expected. We're pretty happy with the average time on site. We now know what departments are most popular. A little bit, some anecdotal feedback about site searches. We had some people complain, a couple of people complained that they couldn't find what they were looking for, and we realized that they thought that this site was our public website because they were looking for external content like that you'd find on Google, which we actually consider kind of a compliment. And so at least, but now we'll be able to use Google Analytics to make changes in the site. We've already had a couple requests for changes on the home page. We just need to see sort of what the traffic is. We'll probably move some things in and out over time. What we learned. So it's important to have a plan for how you're going to migrate content from your old site to your new site. And I would say it's important to have a plan A, a plan B, and probably a plan C. Again, we had some engaged stakeholders in our prior site who were eager to move and update their content to the new site. We had content on the prior site that was really old and dated, less engagement there. So we did a fair amount of content migration ourselves. And then there actually are departments who didn't have any content on the old site, but were eager to have content on the new site. So it's important to have a process or plan in place for where they can become trained and start to learn to use the new intranet. I think this is sort of a second point is relatively straightforward. That the more people you can bring in up front, the better. We were told early on that launching an intranet is more difficult than launching an intranet because people are more passionate about it. I would say there's some truth to that. And even though you want to bring as many people into this decision making as possible, it is important to make clear who the final decision makers are on design and what links are going to be on the home page, that kind of thing. We really only had one issue that was a little bit difficult to resolve, and we just had a member of senior leadership help us resolve that, but that was fairly easy. The way we launched, and we think that there's value in this, is we launched to our management team only at first, not hospital-wide, and they could pass the link along to anyone they wanted, but we gave them some time to look over the site, make sure everything worked, let us know if their content wasn't updated or wasn't there. And we think that was really useful to us to make sure that we were really ready for the system-wide launch. We were quite pleasantly surprised with the feedback we got. Those of you who are in healthcare marketing may know that it's sort of a rule of thumb for these things. If you get no feedback, that's considered good, because a lot of the feedback you get is of the constructive criticism type. We got a little of that, but we really got a lot of positive feedback. So we were really gratified by that, and I think it speaks well for Geonetric about how they really sort of nailed the design and took the input that we gave them and developed a site that really works for our users. So that's our story, and with that, I'm happy to do my best to answer any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for sharing with us the story of going through this process and some of the insights. We've got a couple of questions already, but if you have a question you'd like to pose to Patrick or myself, please enter it in the questions field, and we'll be happy to address that here. We'll start with the couple that we've got, though. The first one is, what type of promotional plan did you develop for the intranet? Sort of how did you launch this within the organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I mentioned, we did the soft launch first, and our promotional plan was pretty limited. So we have a monthly meeting. It's called the monthly management meeting. It's all the managers, directors, and above. So we had kept them apprised of the process, but we presented the new HenryNet to them at one of those meetings, and then told them that we were going to launch it only to them within the next couple of days. And then also we used our advisory group as sort of ambassadors for the new HenryNet. So the initial soft launch was really only promoted to the management group and the advisory group. And then we, even though I was sort of dissing master list emails, we used master list emails leading up to the actual launch to let people know that it was going to launch, give them contact information if there were any problems. So it was really just that. Okay.
And you alluded to some things that you're still planning to do, certainly with the Ask the CEO. Do you have more sort of promotional things in the planning stages?
Yes, we actually have an internal communications plan. So one of the tactics that we're going to deploy is we're going to send out a master list email every Monday morning, the sort of this week at Henry Mayo, and we hope that will contain most of the content has been in all those sort of one-off master list emails previously. So we're going to try to train users to send us their content the week before, so on Monday morning we can send that out. And then that will include a series of links to HenryNet. For example, we'll have the cafeteria menu. We may have news about upcoming events, but all of those we won't have all the information in that email. It'll contain a series of links to drive people to HenryNet. Again, with the hope that over time people will get in the habit of going to HenryNet to seek the information that they need about the hospital, and just to find out what's going on.
And actually, that's a good lead into another question that we have. Do you have any tips in increasing employee engagement on the intranet? And you should mention that you're in the early stages. It's been, what, about 6 or 7 weeks now since this launch, so there's still trying a lot of things and still measuring to see how people are uptaking on the platform. But do you have any tips to share?
Well, I just have 3: content. So we are, and we know that we can do a better job of that. So we really want to give people a reason to go there, and we have some ideas for how we're going to execute that. We've actually been short-staffed since about the day we launched. One of our key people went out on paternity leave, of all things. So we've kind of just been scrambling to sort of keep things afloat. But when we're fully staffed, we're really going to sort of turbocharge our efforts to make sure we have relevant and engaging content that's up to date on the site all the time. And I think that will be the key. Again, our vision is to develop a site where people would just sort of automatically go there when they come to work every day to kind of find out what's going on campus.
Yeah, and I agree with that from what I've seen with intranets and some of the work that we've done. The best answer is to have a lot of those key functions available through the intranet. In many cases, having them only available through the intranet is really sort of the best way to get people in there and using it. And as I mentioned earlier, we do see organizations that are working with other engagement tools that may not be as mission critical or as important or as valuable to the organization, but may serve to get people in there and trying to use the platform as well. So, that can be everything from calendars that talk about, what music is playing in the atrium every day of the week, and other things that just are sort of just questions of interest that people are wondering about, cafeteria menus, swap boards, things like that. The trick is if you have too much of that stuff, it sort of maybe starts to deter from the business purposes that you're trying to accomplish through the internet. We've got a flood of questions coming in, so I'm just going to keep going here. We had a question. I know you mentioned that it was 20 weeks from kickoff until go live, but from the point when you made the decision to move until go live, or maybe until we actually kick things off, how much time was in sort of that part of the process? How long did it take to get maybe the whole thing done from the decision to actually launching?
Yeah, so the process here is that we have something called the IT Steering Committee that has to sign off on any initiatives like this, and also our executive leadership team. And I believe we presented to so we launched in October. We probably presented to the IT Steering Committee around March or April. So to get the green light, and then we started right away. I mean, it took us a while to get our own group together with IT to start to develop the RFI. So whatever the time period is from about March until the end of September would be how long it took. I mean, we'd sort of been talking about having to do this for a long time, but we didn't start the formal process until we put together that presentation for that group.
Yeah, I think that's true of most organizations. There's a lot of talking and a lot of, we really should do this before there's the point where there's sort of the commitment, yes, this year we are actually absolutely going to do this thing, and then things really start rolling from there. We have a question. How are employees able to get to the intranet via a mobile device? Do they go through a Citrix receiver?
I'm not actually positive of the answer to that question.
Yeah, so, and I believe, so Citrix is like a desktop sharing kind of thing.
Yeah.
If I recall, I believe you guys have a network that is not a public network. It's for employees only, but it's one where they can connect their own devices. Is that correct?
Yes, and actually. We have a chat system here, and the person who actually did most of the work on HenryNet just sent me a message, so I have to credit her for the answer. So when your device here, you have to be connected to the employee network here to have access. And Ben, I know you alluded to that earlier on this call. So we're a heavily unionized hospital, which is common in California. Employees aren't allowed to work off the clock, and so if they were to access HenryNet like at home, that's considered working off the clock. So you have to be connected to the employee network here, and then once you have the HenryNet URL in your browser, that's how you would connect. So basically, you launch your browser, you would have the URL, which is fairly simple, and you would have gotten it in an email from us. And then you could just connect that way from that point forward.
Makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. And again, in some environments where the working from home is not is the same kind of challenge, we are doing with a number of organizations setups where they can use their network credentials to log in directly to an intranet, and that would work as a way to get people on their mobile devices into that platform, whether they're physically in the building, regardless of what network they're on, or if they're trying to access it from home. But again, the unique challenges of overtime rules that you guys are under, not unique, but if you're not under those sorts of situations, you can look at some other options like that. But in your case, one of the goals was to put this up so that it was very easily accessible in the building, but not accessible from home where you could get into some of those kinds of challenges. We have a question, slightly different angle here. How much multimedia content is Henry Mayo using on HenryNet, and what types? Do you use an embedded video, audio, or photos, and if so, how?
So a lot of photos now, and VitalSite has a platform for uploading and storing photos. Really no video content yet, but we do plan to add video content. That was one of the requirements of the RFI, that we easily be able to add video content. So right now it's just photos. There's a banner. There's banners that rotate on the homepage with plans for video content, but we don't have it yet.
Okay. Now, as part of the rollout, did you have training sessions for all departments on using the intranet, or did you, I know you mentioned you sent out some emails with links and things like that, did you just sort of get that out there and let people explore on their own?
Yeah, a lot of training, and Geonetric did a lot of that training, so we would set it up with a group of people. Geonetric would provide the training over the phone and via webinar. And then I'm going to give a shout out to the person in our department, Melissa Pennington, who did most of the work. She also did a lot of sort of one-on-one, one-on-three training in addition to that. So we had like a number of training sessions from Geometric, and then additional training sessions that Melissa conducted on her own.
Very good. We have a question about the back-end technology platform, asking, is it SharePoint? And no, it's not SharePoint. It's a platform called VitalSite. It's a content management system that Geonetric has created. SharePoint does certain things very well. It does file management very well. There's some collaborative things it does well. Core content management, though, is not something that SharePoint does particularly well, at least not without a lot of customization to the platform. And at this point, I think from the directions that Microsoft's going with Office 365 and some things like that, I think they're trying to move away from these highly customized SharePoint solutions that don't sort of upgrade and are a little harder to support over the long term. So it's not SharePoint. It is a web content management system that's really designed more for content sharing and sort of traditional content management. That in this case is VitalSite, which is our platform here at Geonetric.
Yeah, like I mentioned, we looked at a SharePoint solution, and it's just impractical for us because of the resources that would have to be dedicated to make it work.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that with a number of organizations now. All right, we have a sort of a longer question here. In my organization, which seems to operate quite similarly to Henry Mayo, there seems to be stratification between intranet usage between clinical hospital staff who use it less and professional or business staff who use it more. How do you drive usage amongst and engagement amongst professional staff given their obligations and schedules? And it may be too early in the process for you to have gotten very far down this path, but do you have any thoughts on that particular sort of the drivers of different usage groups?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is I think that's correct. We have the same experience, but when they do use it, they definitely want to get the information they need like right away. It's especially for the medical staff was, I would say, sort of nervous just that we're going to change anything, because sometimes they have to get to a platform that they need for patient care, and they just they didn't want to have a hard time having to find that. Nursing staff, they're actually, I would say, especially our chief nursing officer is she's really on board with trying to drive usage of HenryNet and making sure that her staff and directors leverage it with usable content. So with nursing staff, it's really more of a content strategy. And in this case, our CNO is really on board with wanting to. I think a part of it with her is that she thinks it'll just be more efficient for them, because now a lot of the information and links that they need can be scattered in different places. And she sees the advantage of having it in one central location where it's easy to find.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. I do think for your physician staff, you need sort of a bit of its own strategy for communication. That's always a challenge, and they're under incredible time pressures and so forth. But they're a difficult group to engage with effectively, and I think you probably need your own strategy around that. And the other areas that we see challenges are, and there are fewer and fewer of them in the hospital all the time, but people who don't sit down in front of a computer very often. And there you need to make sure that, just like as we were rolling out email a number of years ago, we started to bump into these. How do you make sure that you're providing, access to computers, things like that, in places where, say, housekeeping staff can periodically get in and do the things they need to do on those things. I actually think in many ways the move to mobile has made that a little bit easier, because even folks who are not typically sitting in front of a computer due to the nature of their job, most of them have phones that they're carrying with them that are internet capable, and suddenly now they all do have something in their pocket that gives them quick and easy access to these kinds of tool sets if you put the information out there for them to be able to connect to it. We have another question that's probably a little more targeted to me. How does Geonetric roll out new features and functionality? Is this an annual fee or a project-based financial investment? So, a bit of both. And we can certainly follow up with you with more detail after the fact. But there's typically for our platform, there's an annual licensing fee. We do a number of implementations of new functionality per year, number of releases per year. I think we were on the order of about 14 or 15 this past year, and didn't see the final count. But we roll out new capabilities all the time. Now, some of those are things that just happen. There may be something, and there's a new capability that just happens out there. Some of those are new capabilities that are now available, but there's a little bit of work that goes along with it in order to make it actually work for the specific situations within a given site. So, for instance, we've rolled out some new personalization features recently that are based around geographic targeting. Very excited about it. Those aren't things that, it's turned on within the platform, but obviously there's some things we need to do to implement it specifically for your site and the way that you want to use it for your organization. So typically there's a little bit of project-related work that goes along with that when some of that new capability comes out. But the platform itself is developed for hospitals and health systems specifically, so as we roll out new capabilities, they tend to be things that are specifically useful to the majority of our clients. How many FTEs work on the intranet on a daily basis? Dedicated FTEs would be helpful to know on an annual view. Any thoughts on that, Patrick?
Let's see. Well,
do you have any dedicated FTEs on the intranet at all, or is everyone
with
other issues?
Melissa Pennington, the staff member I talked about earlier, she has a number of other responsibilities. She manages all of our social media channels. She's webmaster for our public website. So I don't know, 0.4. She'll probably send me a text message to correct that. But part of our vision was to empower content owners to be able to update their own content, and there's not just because of staffing reasons, but also it's their content, and we want them to be engaged. So for us, it's probably I'm just going to say about a 0.4, And then, you know, like all of us can help. We know how to use the platform, but if you want to talk about a dedicated FTE, that would be about the number.
Okay. Very good. And I will say we are about to launch a new industry survey. We asked lots of questions about staffing for the departments that tend to manage both the public web and the intranet. I don't think we've broken it out, though, so I'm not sure that we'll quite get to the answer to your question within that survey. But do keep your eyes open over the next couple of weeks here, and we're going to be launching the data collection piece for a new industry survey. It's been a little over a year since we put our last one out, and are really excited to see how things have shifted during that time. All right, we have time for one final question, and it's about your advisory committee. And wondering if you could talk a little bit more about who was involved in the advisory committee, how many people did you have, and how did you recruit them or get them engaged and involved?
So I think there were about in the sort of the core group, there were about 15, I believe. Some of those were easy to identify because, as I mentioned, they were the group that maintained updated content on the previous HenryNet. Others were ones where the survey results showed, I'm going to use human resource as an example. One of the survey results is that users used the previous HenryNet to access different human resource functions. For example, our timekeeping system, Kronos. So we knew we wanted to have an HR person on the panel. And then others were ones who just sort of showed interest as we were talking about this. So it was sort of a mix of how we identified and recruited people. And of course, we need to have some people from IT, both because they own the previous platform, and also we just needed their help technically. So it was sort of a mix of some people were sort of self-identified, some we identified, and some were kind of in between.